Before we get going into your Hockey IQ podcast episode, I want to thank our sponsor, Rapid Shot. Rapid Shot is the smart shooting lane. It's like a batting cage for hockey players. Very cool. Tracks your shot in three ways: accuracy, shot speed, and reaction time. Easy to use. Actually, I used it when I played and was growing up. Very easy. Simply scan your phone in, select your settings, and start shooting. You can see your stats on the app and online. You can check them out at rapidshot.com. Great small business. I actually grew up with one of the owner's sons and have played with all the family members by now, just in local pickups here in Ohio. Very cool local business. Awesome product. I love it. I know quite a few NHLers have them in their homes. A lot of D1 programs have it at their rinks. So you have to check this out. Rapidshot.com. Check it out. Rapid Shot, thank you so much for sponsoring our podcast.
Back on the Hockey IQ podcast, we're bringing on Adam Nicholas. So, Adam, picking up where we left off here, what do you want to talk about today? I know last time we talked about understanding the environment, principles of the environment. I think that's going to lead us directly into creating predictability with teammates, empowering others, all that kind of stuff. But let's go where you want to go with this.
Yeah. So, I mean, over, the last little bit here, a couple weeks since we last talked, but for me, one of the biggest elements for us that I look at is I don't think skill by itself is enough, right? Like you as players, I always look at this, and players are all so keen on like becoming the best versions of themselves. But when you look at the bigger picture, like you can be the best player out there, but if you cannot help your teammates become better, how good is that actual skill? There's quite a bit of players in the game now that have elite level motor skills. They don't know how to work with others. They don't know how to help others work off of them so that they can create a lot more than what they are. So I think that's such a really big topic. Like for an example, I was working on shooting the other day with a couple players, and I call it, my basketball buddy calls it spot shooting in basketball, where a player stands in one spot and they get fed ball, shot, fed ball, shot. Well, what happens with spot shooting is players don't understand the timing of how to arrive into certain locations to actually get the shot off. And so their technique's great inside the repetition for repetition concept. However, what happens is you don't actually understand how to read the timing. And so that's kind of where I've gone recently is the timing elements of how to arrive into spots that players want to use as shooting space. And then that's how we work on shooting. Because for me, like a lot of players now, they've shot the 500 pucks every single day, and they've gotten their motor, their shot motor to where it needs to get to. Now it's about understanding the timing, because the timing and the arrival time and the pace of passes and the variability of different passes and environments, that's what bottlenecks the movement. It's not necessarily the shot itself. And so that's really where I've worked a lot with a lot of players, and they really like that idea because they found themselves to struggle more in the timing than the actual physical movements of the shot.
So it's not so much about the technique, but the environmental factors that go into actually utilizing or pulling that skill and saying, I need to utilize it here and when.
Well, that's the recall, right? That's that, where you have a good understanding of environment, where you can actually know and anticipate what's coming, right? So that you can actually prepare your body to perform a specific movement. And that's what's really the beauty of it. I always do a little test where I have players do visualization, where I'll have them come out in the corner and I'll give them a pass. There's no defenders anywhere. And I say, okay, do movements based off what your brain sees. And each player will go, and then they're doing different things. And it's actually telling of how much knowledge a player has from previous playing experience in that environment. It's quite interesting when you tell them, hey, like make movements based off of what you think this environment would look like for you. it's pretty interesting. I suggest many coaches to try that.
But you really start to see which players are pulling from, okay, I might get this. What would I do? Like they're starting to understand what they would do based on the defender, and you're starting to understand who has the ability to like visualize things before they happen. I've not done something exactly like that, but similar idea of like, make it your own. Like what, visualize like you're making a play here. Like don't just go up and down the ice or don't roll out of the corner. Like show me something based on what you think you'd see, general idea there. And it's fascinating to see who's willing to do it right away or has the ability to do it right away and who's basically like, what do I do? What do I do? And it's like absolute struggle, like trying to get them off that pathway and onto something where they're understanding, like you said, or of there's going to be an opponent there, there's going to be pressure, and you have to solve that.
No, that's exactly it. Like this is where I think the more and more I start to watch other skill coaches out there, the thing that I've noticed is it's all geared towards, and the success is geared towards how well a player can move. That's what the success rate is. And I don't necessarily believe that anymore. I used to be like that, repetition, go up and down the ice in linear pathways just to work movement. And now I'm more on the lines of, hey, try this, but we stay inside a game, whatever it is. And I'll give them cues or analogies of what I need there, how they should actually express their body in terms of that environment and that read and cue, if they need help. But most of the time, like I've realized that a lot of these players just really don't understand what they're trying to actually do. So another example would be if I give a player a puck and I don't tell them anything, their first order of business is going to want to problem solve the defender. But they don't have any objective after they problem solve that defender. So then it becomes very reactive and they're trying to react off what the defender is doing versus, I'll give you another example. A player comes in on an entry. They drive deep to the bottom part of the circle. They do a delay. A lot of players don't understand that when they do that, as soon as they turn, there's a ton of space back up the wall. They just got to sprint and accelerate to create separation. A lot of players will turn, stop for a second to see what the next play is, and by then defensemen close. But because they don't understand space, they don't understand that by them driving the net, everybody is over tracking and back checking. They don't have confidence on the turn to then sprint up the wall without even having to pause and look at the environment. They don't have that knowledge because they don't understand that when I drive here and then I delay, I've driven everybody down to the net. And then now I can turn and accelerate up the boards before I even have to look to make a play. And so those are things that players just don't understand where the space is going to be after they perform a motor skill.
Yeah, or even when they should stop up. Like, not a bad time to stop up is right when a defenseman goes for that pivot as you're driving and they're starting to hit the oh shit button in their brain.
Well, so that's actually one thing I'll push back on you on. So I do get the cue of the physical movements. However, it matters the depth of when that pivot happens. So if that pivot happens just inside the blue line, well, there's no space to actually cut back on. So I'm going to actually have to drive deeper into the zone to suck the D down and the weak side D down into the net so that then I can turn back up and create that space to make my next play. So it actually matters where the D actually performs that pivot. And that's where I think a lot of players don't understand that at real time and real pace. They just are trying to react off of what the defender's doing. So that pivot is a cue of reaction, but it's not a tactical understanding. It's just me responding to movement patterns. So, but for me, like that's where we have to teach, like, okay, if I get down into the circle or deep into the circle in the zone, I know that there's going to be backspace for me. I already know that. The confidence level's there. I know that I can take the back of the net and there's going to be space on the other side of the net. Like those are where players have to know, like that's where the space is going to be. So I can feel confident performing certain movements to create that if I can't take the net. right? So that's where, or I don't have a cross ice pass available, et cetera. Like many different things could happen, obviously, from different variables in the situation, but they just don't understand where the actual space is and or how to create the space to make next plays. That's my biggest.
Yeah, they're just not seeing it all together. And this is something you and I talked off air of, like, the first thing is they need to be able to at least see the game, and having scanning being a massive part of a program or a scouting network or whatever it may be, or just increasing the scanning is absolutely massive. Obviously, there goes to the next level. Okay, well, we're scanning, but we can't just look. We have to look for the details within the scan. But like, it's such an I kind of call it like a domino. Like, it's the first domino. Once that falls, then you're starting to teach way differently than if you're going down a movement pattern teaching standpoint. Like, the scan itself is absolutely massive, and just being able to see it, and then you're starting to understand, oh, why would I stop up here? I need to drive, or what is actually being given, or what can I take?
No, exactly. That's exactly it. Like, that goes back to again, when I keep harping on principles, like, I just don't think we do a good enough job teaching principles. And for me, like, you can read the ice how you want to read the ice. And so let's say, Greg, you and I are teammates, we're on the same line, and you're scanning, but I'm thinking something else, but you're thinking something completely different because we're not aligned on principle. We're not aligned. We're not aligned on how we work together. In practice, we didn't get enough reps in practice of how to create that predictability with one another and sync our principles, right? And that's what I think the scanning really ultimately does, right? And then once you perform the action, like, to me, I think if you truly have clear objectives, things will organically happen. But the objectives are never clear, right? Like, the way coaches teach the game is through a structural base, right? And so when you see a player scan, it's because they're trying to identify if the structure's intact. That's what they're scanning for. They're not really scanning for the next play. They're scanning because the objective of the coach was this structure. So they're making sure that structure is holding intact so that they can then do what they need to do to execute a job and express their motor skills the way they need to express them. So the problem is we never teach the gray area in which it lies greatness. That's where greatness is. And so, what's the gray area? Well, the gray area is being able to build the structure back up when it falls apart, right? It's those reads that everybody talks about. It's those things that happen in the game that I don't believe a lot of players have true elite understanding of. And for me, that's where we have to teach it. How do you teach it? You've got to get players more in the environment, right? And that's what we talked about earlier, is just getting players in these environments and then giving them tasks of what to look for and what to execute. I think you're going to start really allowing the players to, if they're going to surprise the coaches, actually, these players are going to surprise the coaches more than they think. Like, I think so many times, like, all these coaches just want to give the answer to the players, like, hey, you should turn here, you should have done this. No, you got to build strategy with players. You got to build tactics with players. And then let's see what happens. And if they don't recall it, say, hey, man, did you look for the space? Did you look for the 2-on-1? Did you look to attack interior? When you start talking to the best players in the game, they have underlining principles of how they play. And they try to do it over and over again. They try to have instances where they can create high instance rates in certain areas that allow them to do what they do to excel. So that's again another area where I think we have to do a better job at getting players more instances, because a lot of times we're trying to teach players off of one-off situations instead of looking at the instance rate and then being able to actually help them because they're there a lot.
And you just kind of talked about the evolution of a coach. Like, most coaches, they yell and then they figure out, okay, that's not very effective. Then they start telling and giving the answers. And they're like, oh, they realize that's not very effective. And some people never get out of that. And then the real great ones get into the idea of asking and getting players to change their focus and key in on things that work for them through their eyes and allow their genius to really show. And there's genius in every player. Just a matter to, some players can execute at much higher levels of genius, we'll say.
The people that are really good at player development or enhancements is not actually physically making a player better, because that's actually impossible. The player makes themselves better, right? But what a guide does, not even a coach, like we're guiding players, is you just change their lens of how they think. Oh, wow, okay, I can still do this stuff, but I should actually view it also this way, so that I know how to respond and express myself in different ways, right? And be able to create different things from that situation. Like a prime example, I had a player, he signed a really good deal 3 years ago. His deal's up this year on his 4th year deal, and he's a 4th line player. And I said to him, okay, listen, you need to be able to generate 2 shots coming off the back wall a night. 2 shots. That's all he's going to try to do. He's going to try to create that. And these are some ideas. Okay, so I gave him the task. I gave him what he's trying to do on a shift-to-shift basis in the offensive zone from a total game standpoint. And he did it. He scored 10 goals as a 4th line player. He signed a really good contract as one of the premier 4th line players in the league. And to me, I did nothing. I didn't fix him. He did that. I just helped shift his mindset, what he was thinking, to get him to stay in the environment that the coaches expect him to stay in, but then also add value to his game, where now he is looking for specific things. And he started to develop, not to Sidney Crosby's level, but he started to develop some tendencies that Crosby would do, because his alignment from an objective standpoint was there with his. And that's what allowed, and he didn't look like Sid, but the idea and the way he was trying to move to create things down low like that, he started to do. And that happened naturally for him. It's because he changed the way he was thinking, and he started scanning better, because he was looking for ways to get those 2 shots, right? He didn't want to, one of the principles for him was, don't let the defender pin you, because offense is about movement, defense is about stopping movement. So if they stop you, the advantage defense. That was one of his principles down low. Try to stay moving, right? And that's what I mean by principles and objectives. That's what I think is really the focus for each player. You got to know where their instances are, and you've got to help them and guide them to create off of those instances.
Yeah, and I've got a similar story for a kid who plays Division III college, and he was an okay junior player, but he's probably running a point every other game. And then he went to college, and he's actually increased his points per game, even though the level is increased. And our whole conversation was around, like, his creativity was fantastic. Skating maybe wasn't great, but he had fantastic hands. And it was all about leveraging, okay, like, we want to use your hands more. We want to use your awesome vision and touch with passing, but how do we do that? Like, and the whole thing for him was he just wasn't seeing it. Like, he'd get a puck and then he'd play. So our whole thing was like, okay, we just need you to scan more and more and more. Whenever you think you've scanned enough, you haven't. Just keep going it more and more, and just doing that one little simple thing. Like, he talked about it himself when we were debriefing. He's like, I actually see the ice way better, like, because I see it early. I can understand the pressure, where it's coming from. Obviously, my skating holds me back in situations, but I at least can turn away. I know when to stop up and be able to find guys. And then the next thing we worked on was speed differentials, and he started actually beating guys one-on-one, and it wasn't just with his hands. Like, he was actually being able to get a puck protect and get after it. After the fact, he beats the guy's stick and skates and all of that through his hands. And it was like an absolutely fascinating moment to see the light bulb go off for both of us, of like how, like, all the things that we were working on, and that by far was the most valuable, just being able to see early and often, and how that leveraged everything else in the skill sets. So I love that idea of just principles driving the rest, rather than we need to work on your drag shot.
No, exactly. And like, I had a really good conversation with, also, let's go back to that. It's all relative, right? Like, NHL, D3, like, no matter what it is, if a player understands the environment and can see the game, they're going to be a much better player, regardless of their motor skills. Now, obviously, the motor skills do matter, and that's like where sometimes people are like, oh, you don't care about. No, I care about the motor skill execution, but I don't care if someone is Like there's so many times where you see a player, they're so good in practice. Like I remember when I was playing, coaches would say, "Oh, he's a practice player." Well, he's a practice player because he doesn't understand the game, but he moves beautifully so that when you tell him and you do your flow drills where pass here, move here, move here, there's no thinking. That player has zero thinking involved. So that's why he moves freely, because the thinking is taken out. So that player now, there's no bottleneck to their motor skills. They're just firing away. They're flying around the rink because you've told them what to do. So they look great. All of a sudden, the game happens and they have to make reads and they have to understand, the environments. They can't do it. They have no clue how to do it because they isolated their skill sets. And then when you explicitly tell them where to go, they look awesome. Right. And so to me, that's where we have to connect motor skill learning to real environments so that those type of players don't keep repeating themselves. And there's more practice players than there are gamers. There's more guys that are really good in practice that can actually play the game. And that's because they don't even understand the game, because we build skill as if skill itself is enough. And that's my whole thing. That's why I've shifted gears on what I used to do. I used to do 6 lines on the goal line, up and down the ice, edge work, and all those things. I used to do that. And then I realized, like, the payoff isn't there for players. You could put so much work into that, like hours and hours and hours into those things. And then you quickly realize, well, the player actually didn't get that much better. And then by November, New Hampshire, the strength that they built up from that repetition starts to fade because they relied on that repetition for repetition to make them feel better. But really, it's false. It's false because it's more of a workout than it is actually learning motor skill functionality and motor skill tactical execution.
Or a player tries to pull that technique out at the very wrong time, and it fails.
Here's a great example of that. That's Greg. That's a perfect example. That's exactly it. So I don't know. Do you ever see like players anchor their heels when they stick handle?
Oh, and stop moving their feet.
Yeah, but they lift their toes to anchor their heels, like, and they kind of like have a little shuffle going.
Yeah, they get a little too wide on their base.
Yeah, and then they lift a couple stick handling companies used to teach this as the stick handling base, where they would like shuffle on their heels and shift their weight back on their heels while they stick handled. So we used to teach that at our camp. Numerous camps taught this. You would get your feet outside your shoulders and you get on your heels and you'd lift your toe. We called it toe popping. Toe pop and you would handle it. And I had a kid one time, we played a scrimmage and he gets the puck in the neutral zone and he just starts toe popping. And I'm like, oh my God, that's not the right time to use that. But because we repped it out so much, he just was dropping it in everywhere on the ice and he couldn't move. He was very, very, he wasn't productive at all.
Yeah, or like the Mohawk turns, like how often do those get overused?
Oh, that's probably the most overused skill in the game right now. And it's at the wrong time.
So
it's at the wrong time.
Yeah, I want to pivot slightly here on us because this kind of starting to get to the point where, okay, so the players feel good in the current system because it makes them feel good and they feel that repetition and they're like, oh, I'm getting better at this movement pattern. So it obviously requires a change of mindset and education for the players, parents, stakeholders, agents, you name it. You know, how do we go about changing the mindset of the players so they are better equipped to develop themselves?
What a question, because I think this is the biggest issue, right? So the players in the summertime are searching to this, right? They're looking for things like this to increase their game, right? So let me add, like, I don't know if we talked about this earlier or not, but what are coaches doing in the summertime? So the summertime is for the players to get better. What's the summertime for the coaches?
Go into the lake and getting a beer out.
Yeah, maybe, or just watching video, watching over and over again other teams playing, right? So they're watching other teams, and then they're talking to other coaches, and what are they doing with other coaches? Oh, they're sharing drills. Sharing drills. Like the reason I don't really share drills, to be quite honest with you, and the reason I don't share drills is because I don't really write a lot of my stuff down. Things I write down are some games, but I don't write a lot of my drills down. The reason I don't write my drills down is because when I have to work on something with a player, I put together a scenario in a drill on the spot for them because it's a specific thing that they need to work on. Right. And so I can't write down all my drills because I don't have repeatable drills. Right. And it's because each player has something different to work on, whether it's a read, whether it's a body positioning thing inside the environment. When I work with them, I don't do that. And then the games that I built them off of how I view the game being played from a principle standpoint. So those games only matter to me. Like, they're not going to mean anything to anybody else, only because I know what I'm looking for inside those environments. Because I went outside and looked at other sports and I was like, wow, okay, soccer, hockey, lacrosse, and basketball are literally the same sport from a principle standpoint. If you could literally take the same principles and you could spread them across all four sports. And that's how you got to build things. But a lot of times, all these coaches, they don't know principles of the game. They just know instances of the game. Oh, entries. Okay, what are we going to do on entries? This is how we got to play it. This is exactly what we need to do. No. The entry is the entry. What are we trying to create up the entry? Well, we're trying to create a numerical advantage. We're trying to create space. We're trying to create width and depth. Okay, those are principles that we're trying to create on the entry. Now, let's talk about that. Let's give some players some ideas, and then let's build, okay? And then to express to the players, okay, on this entry, all right, how are we going to create a shot? What do we have to do to create the shot? What's that look like? Okay, well, we got to do this, got to push the D. Okay, what if the tracker's here? How do we problem solve that? All right, and then we have to train to pick up those cues and identify the right solution on each entry. And it has to be with three people. It can't be one-on-one solo. It has to be with, you can read the situation. One of my biggest pet peeves is when I see on the ice, you have four coaches just standing there or passing the pucks, and the players are doing movements around nothing or around a net. Why aren't those coaches giving physical cues? Well, it's because they value the motor skill over the cognitive skill. They value the movement pattern more than they value what actually the player is trying to look for and create off that, right? And so that's where the problem is it's harder because the players every summer are trying to get better from a cognitive element, but yet it's recycled drills and recycled practice teams and ideas that bottleneck it, that slow it down. It's the complete explicit coaching methods that coaches aren't getting better teachers. They're just getting better platforms of how to show a video clip or how to, design a drill. That's it. They're not understanding how to actually relate to the player to teach them those principles. And that's where I think is one of the bottlenecks to this whole thing.
So following up with that is, okay, so coaches got to be better with principles, but how do we get players to best understand, like, this is what you need to be searching out and seeking, and why is this the better way of going about player development? Because I feel like it's something that no one really understands well unless you really dive into this stuff. So how do we make this go a little more mass market and help a lot more folks?
You can't do it unless the coaches understand, right? You just can't. The coaches have to be the ones driving it first and foremost. Why? Why do I say that?
They've got a larger influence, so they can really drive the change a lot more effectively than going one by one.
Well, how many of your players, Greg, want to appease you? When they play for you, they look at you and they see the greatest coach in history. They do. They think you are the best. Your players think that. The majority of them do. They think you are going to help them and get them to the next level of their hockey experience, or they think that this is it. This is the highest they're ever going to get because you're so good. They love it. They respect you. So all they're trying to do is please you. So if you don't have an understanding and respect those type of principles and viewpoints, neither are they. They're not going to do it. because for them to get more ice time and enjoy the game more, you need to like them. And then you're going to roll them back out. It starts with the coach. The coach has to have an elite understanding of that stuff and feel confident with what the players want to do. Right? The only reason this is the thing that like people have to understand. When you're playing elite AAA youth hockey, I'm talking elite level AAA youth hockey, and teams that actually have to win, like the EHF in Massachusetts. Just so people are clear, you have to have a certain winning percentage throughout the organization, or you get kicked out, or you get moved down to the AAA division. So they go out and recruit players because they have to win to keep it competitive. Now, I think that's a pretty good model. However, you start riding the best players on the team, and they get to go out and just do what they want over and over and over again. And some of them inherently build these principles just by playing, nature of being in the environment and getting all those reps, right? And so that's what happens everywhere. Like when they go out and recruit the best players, coaches just end up riding the best players, and then they demoralize and try to like overcoach the bottom end to get them to the top end. Well, the reason the top end's so good is, one, yes, they have good genetics where they can skate better than everybody and handle a puck and shoot better, but they also get the repetitions that the other kids don't get, where they can make mistakes and it's forgiven, right? And that's where we have to be comfortable understanding to let players make mistakes and let them work through it, and don't put too much stress on them so that they don't feel tense when they're back in those environments, and they feel like, okay, I can problem solve this now. Coach really helped me and guided me, because coach has an understanding of those principles, and he's not going to yell at me because coach is so confident in his own skin that he cares more about me than he cares about a winning record. And then everything starts to unfold naturally.
Yeah, and going along with this, Adam, I believe what you're getting to is like a good mindset from a coach, that they're able to create a good environment brings out the talent and allows that talent to flourish. Like, for example, when we feel relaxed and free, our body's going to move a lot more free and end up pulling off these motor skills that maybe we hadn't practiced, or finding a new way to go about it, allowing the performance to really elevate itself.
No, that's exactly it. That's where players start to become themselves, and they start to love the game. You create that passion. But when you're constraining players all year long on, this is our system, this is our structure, and you better execute this system and structure or you're not going to play, right? That is so much stress and anxiety on a player that turns them into not loving the game, right? And that's where, to me, that's what really builds up those roadblocks for a lot of players to be like, yeah, I understand the game, this is great. But then all of a sudden they get back and get in front of that coach again, and they know that if they even step outside of what he's asking, they're done. And that's really the underlining factor. This is one of the biggest things, man. Like people want to talk about the Chicago Steel, and as if like, oh, you guys just get the best players outside of the program. We do, because we roll our players. You go watch our games. We play 4 lines with no remorse. Like every player is going all the time. And then we coach them up. We teach them. Like this is the way it is in our practices. Like if a player doesn't play on a weekend, our coach is doing practice video with players and talking them up, telling them about good things they're doing, and making sure that the players stay on a right path mentally. And they're not just forgotten because they're not in the lineup. Like that's what separates the Steel. Like they play players, they work with players. They're not benching them for making a play. And then our players are free physically to make plays inside the style of play. That's the secret. That's the secret. And if you're able to do that, you're going to get better players day in and day out. And they're going to perform.
And it kind of reminds me of also the Buffalo. I feel like the Chicago Steel and Buffalo Sabres are both two programs where in the past few years, especially under Don Granato with Buffalo, and obviously the Steel have had many great coaches, and yourself and others. Like they want to come to the rink. Like there's only a certain amount that you can push players, and finding ways to pull them along almost and have them have that desire to come to the rink is one of the critical factors to getting more out of them, which at the end of the day makes your players and your team better.
Well, that's exactly it. Wanting to come and not feeling like as soon as they come into that door, anxiety starts to come into their body because they know they're getting judged, right? They know that they're going to get pulled into the coaching office did the night before. Things add up. And it just adds, right? And to me, like with Ryan Hardy as GM, he really guided me to become who I am today as a coach. We don't just do that for players. Like you look at the Chicago Steel and you look at Greg Moore's in the Marlies, and Brock Sheehan just got hired by the Chicago Wolves as their American League head coach, and myself and Dan Muse and Tristan Musser, who works for the Sabres, and Hardy, who's an assistant GM of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Like our group moves forward because of how we empower and how we guide not our coaches plus our players. And it's that our culture is awesome, man. It's really cool. And it helps us express who we are and what we want to be and what we want to become. Right. And that stems from Larry Robbins. Larry Robbins for the Steel is just incredible with that. Like he really enjoys that element of it. So, and he gets the right people to help us, become who we want to become.
That's fantastic. And this is something I talk about with a lot of coaches that I mentor is like, no matter what you're doing, you're either creating pressure or permission. And what does the situation call for? And most of the times it's going to be permission. Like you need to give permission to folks to be their authentic selves. Very rarely do you need to really put pressure on someone to get the best out of them. Usually it's the exact opposite. And there's a great movie called Bridge of Spies. And like the spy is getting charged and Tom Hanks is the lawyer. It's like, you don't seem very concerned about everything that's going on, all the severity of the charge that are against you. The guy goes like, would it help? It's like, no, like freaking out would not help in this situation. Like just calmly dealing with it is the better situation. Like having that freedom, that permission to explore the environment, become what you want, deal with it, whatever the situation is, the best you can is the best way to go about it. Creating permissions rather than pressure is something I harp on all the time. I'm assuming just based on the culture you're talking about, it's the exact same there. Maybe it's not the same language, but just the idea of giving permission to explore and find solutions in the environment situations has got to be absolutely critical.
Well, it is. And what I think is the most empowering thing you can do for players is like, don't paint black and white as the right answer. Right? Like there's ways that you want things done. I get that. But at the end of the day, if it gets done, it gets done. Right. And that's where we have to be better as coaches to be like, hey, you know what? He didn't execute his motor skills in that turn perfectly. Who cares? He's still getting to play. Why am I going to harp on him for his turning execution there? Why? Because 5 turns down the road, he's going to go back to his bad habit? Well, maybe, because the game is so fluid that it might bottleneck his movement pattern. Right? So, or he might go back into a beautiful turn. Well, that's because the environment allowed him to do that. He was really stable. He just got on the ice. He's early in a shift. He's fresh. There's so many variables that are impacting decision-making and motor skill learning. There's so many things. So how is there one way or the other? You can't tell me that, right? And that's where I get at with coaches all the time. Like, oh, aren't you going to tell him? Aren't you going to go tell him like the right way to do that pivot? I'll give him some ideas. I'm not going to tell him the right way to do that because that environment might have cognitively spooked him. And so he crossed his feet on his pivot versus open up and use the open hip pivot. He felt as if he was getting burnt. So he crossed his feet to close space quickly versus just opening up his hips and guiding. So I'm going to look at, the situation at a whole first. And then I'm going to go watch, 10 pivots to see if it's a trend. Now, if it's a trend and he's inherently pivoting like that, let's get back into the shop and work on that motor skill. But I'm not going to go off of a one-off clip that could have been a variety of reasons of why he executed the way he executed. But at the end of the day, to me, I think we put too much onus on the right way and the wrong way. And for me, that's not giving permission to players, open permission, I should say. That's giving them, one way to do things. And I just think it's just going to constrain in a lot of players that way versus enhancing.
Yeah.
So.
Continuing on here, I want to talk about maybe something that you first got known for early on, which was your defensive skating system. And obviously, pictures and videos are worth 1,000 words. I'm curious to understand, obviously explain this a little bit for the listeners here. What is your defensive skating system? How did it come to be? And why do you feel like it was so important and sprung your career a little bit?
So sake was how to train. And so like I watched Nick Lindstrom and Scott Niedermayer, and I saw how they would, execute their body, their motor skills to do certain things defensively to keep a tight gap and their spacing tight. So I was like, okay, let's break it all down and teach it and build a whole system. And so actually coaches love that because I built something into a system. And so that they can wrap their head around that because it's repeatable, and we're turning players into Niedermayer and Lynch. Now, if I know what I knew today, I probably never would have produced that video ever. But you grow and learn as a coach, and those are little tools that you want to use. Like I'll give you an example. Like I would bring that system to good NHL defensemen. And one time, a really good NHL D man looked at me and goes, "Adam, I'm not going to use this skating technique." And I said, "Well, why?" And he says, "Because I can't generate any speed. Because I used to be all about no crossovers. D can never cross their feet. You should never cross your feet defensively." And this player goes, "Adam, I'm crossing my feet. I don't care what you say." And I said, "Okay, go ahead, I guess." And he goes, "Well, I'm crossing over because sometimes I got to match speed. And a crossover is a speed skill. So I need to use that to match a blazing forward." I said, "That makes sense." So from there, I was like, all right, these are just like what I was teaching in that defensive skating system video was more about speed control and how to keep your spacing tight earlier on. So I have to have the elite level understanding of environment to actually apply what I want, right? And so I can't be reacting, because if I'm reacting to the environment, these skills don't work. They're not explosive ballistic movements. They're controlled geometry type movements where I'm angling and I'm using them to control my speed to force players to go where they don't want to go. And so that's kind of the system I built, and using, my terms like kickback, ladder steps, surfing, side pushes. Those things were all great, but I didn't really connect them to the actual game. So those things, for a lot of players, just you didn't get a lot of return on it. I didn't see a ton of the return. So yeah, I did build that, and it was great. And coaches loved it because it was, quieting their feet down, getting their D more on a linear pathway versus bellying out on certain transitional moments. They all love that. But the reason players bellied out and they weren't linear on certain movements is just because they didn't know how to read the transition quicker. It wasn't the footwork. Once the players learn how to read the transition quicker, they start doing those things naturally. They don't need me to tell them how to move. It just starts coming naturally for them. That's why Nick Lindstrom did a lot of things himself. So Niedermayer did a lot of things himself from a physical motor skill standpoint, because they knew how to read the transitions. And that's why they were performing those motor skills often. Like, there's other defensemen that were in the league that were doing similar things to Nick Lindstrom. That's because when they read it correctly, they would do the same thing that he would do, because that's the way to do it.
Fantastic. And I'm assuming you're still teaching a lot of those components, but there's a lot more that goes into it than just, the motor patterns themselves. It's like how to read it, when to utilize it, or some ideas of when to do that, rather than, hey, you need to do this in this situation. Like, hey, if you're reading this kind of thing, this might be basically suggesting a lot of these topics, and maybe running through these at like a development camp or summer camp or something like that, where you're still giving like some tools, some ideas to players to increase their ideas of what they can do, but not giving this as a solution for a lot of things and allowing the players to truly own the tactic, the movement patterns, etc. Does that sound about right?
Well,
You can be short on that. You don't need to go deep.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. To me, it's just educating them on these movements and then letting them explore on how to apply. Right? Like that's all it is. It's not me repping it out forever. Right? Like it's not like, okay, we're gonna do an hour and a half, 2 hours on these movement patterns. That's not it. It's like, hey, this is what a kickback is. This is what a ladder step is. This is their purpose. Now use them at your own discretion. But now let's put them in environments so they can feel the pressures. They can feel when to use it, when not to use it, when to apply a crossover, when not to apply a crossover. And then, for, I don't know, a good half of a year, 6 months, they're still thinking about these tools. But after that, once they understand the environments, their body starts to respond without any thinking. They're just reading the play. And their body starts to understand these things. That's how we do it in Chicago, where during practice, the coaches are holding the kids accountable for motor skills inside the drills. It's not about just going up and down the ice and repping it out. We're like, hey, you got to do kickbacks here. Hey, D, you got to do this here. And showing them inside the drills with a speed, time, and pressures, hey, apply these skills, and if you fail, no problem. You can adjust because you're going to get that environment right away. You're going to get it again. Now you can execute it this way. That's where, to me, like if you hold yourself accountable and you really feel as a player a tool is going to help you, you will practice it in the drills that the coach has designed for that day. You will work on it. And that's the job of a development coach and a skills coach, is to build passion around a specific tool or patterns that the player is like, yeah, this is going to help my game. And when the player thinks that and they get excited and you articulate it, they're going to grasp it and take it and use it as a valuable asset.
Awesome stuff here. And I love that the road may be slowing your voice down, because there's so many good things happening and coming out of your voice right now that we all need to slow down and really dive into everything that you're throwing down, because it's actually massive. Going to help players, coaches, parents, fans, etc. Get better at whatever they want to do, or ways that they see the game, or ways they see development. This is awesome. I still have a few other items I want to get through, but I really would love to hear your thoughts on using tournaments and games for development. So for summer hockey, the old question is, should you play it? Should you not? Is it worth your money? Is it worth your not? Should you spend your money on skills coaches or development coaches? Like, how can players best use tournaments, games, development coaches for developing themselves? Because at the end of the day, everyone's trying to get better so they can achieve their goals and what they want to do and perform better.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So to basically answer your question, there's a balance. You have to have a balance, and I think there's a three-step process to this. And like for me, the reason you go to tournaments is not for being able to get recruited. It's a test. It's a quiz, and that quiz is for you to work on things. And I think what happened is with tournaments are such a great thing, but now it turned into such a recruiting setting, or to a measuring stick to measure yourself against other people. Well, I think now we got to turn those tournaments back into quizzes, where you have to then see how the player is playing. Because what happens is, as everybody knows, and when I say this, people are going to chuckle. You see, the kids go all by themselves end to end. They don't pass. To me, that's not the game. That's just not how you want it to be played. And that's because of how we perceive that tournament to be. It's a showcase. It's a measuring stick. I'm better than everybody physically. And the coaches, again, they're having a good time. They're not teaching much. It's really just a, let the kids go out and play mentality. Or some coaches, it's a moneymaker for them to bring 6 teams to the tournament and get everybody going. But to me, it's a quiz. It's a test to see where you are from not just a physical standpoint, but how you actually understand the game and to be coached up that way. So I do think tournaments can provide tremendous value if it's brought in the right frame of mind, and people are using it to actually increase their child's or their players' hockey IQ and intelligence, not just to go there to measure themselves against other people or get recruited. There's certainly times for the recruiting process, but I think every single tournament, it can't just be a showcase to show your kid off, because that's where you start to develop those anxieties of the game too, where kids don't want to fail and it becomes uncomfortable to actually play. And that's where burnout for me really happens. And then secondly, like I believe, skill camps and stuff are definitely valuable. But again, the problem that I see within the skill industry is it's business driven. So from Monday to Friday, the kids there, 20 hours on the ice, they better, when the parent comes on Friday, they better be good at, the skating drills. So that when the parent comes like, holy crap, on Monday, my kid couldn't do this on Friday. Wow, they can do it. Well, the reason they can do it is because they've been doing it all week. They've been mastering the movement. But then all of a sudden, again, 6 months later, they lost it. Well, that's because they weren't doing it, or not even 6 months, a month later, a month and a half later, their kid can't perform it. So they got to go back and do private lessons to speed them back up. Well, how about you just let your kid play 3-on-3 and let them understand the game? How about you hire somebody to get them to understand the game, and then you sprinkle in those tools, because the kid is going to actually know how to apply tools inside those environments. So that's kind of where, for me, like that's where I see the value in a lot of things. Like you want a skills coach, and go see a skills coach. They actually have to understand the game, and they've got to be able to, whatever they're teaching you, build environments for your child or player to express and learn the timing, spacing, and speed and objectives of why you're teaching them certain movement patterns. But I still think we're really far behind that and getting it to that level. It's because it's going to take a lot of coaches to really flip how they think, where everybody right now is repetition for repetition. That's where everybody's thinking. And a lot of people are reading books and they're thinking that they actually have the idea, but they don't, because they get stuck in this vortex of just repeating everything because it's easy. And it's that's another topic we can talk about too, is like, I had a great conversation with coaches talking about, I want my players to fail. And then I look at the coaches, I go, when do you fail? When do you actually improve yourself and fail? You're all practicing about fail forward and fail this. And well, why don't you change a drill and try a drill and fail and see if that works, and et cetera. Like think from the tournament, the skill industry, there's a balance there, and you got to find the right mixture, because playing the game is actually why you're doing the skills. You're doing it to play the game, not to be good at doing skills. And I think we got stuck in that frame of mind.
Awesome. One final question for you, and it's not really a question, it's more of a reflection. One of the inspiring stories in the NHL that I think has gone under the radar for a long time, and I'd love to illuminate it a little bit, is how good Hathaway, who plays for the Capitals, has done through his entire career at finding a way, finding a solution, and developing himself into a role. Because he was late into the NCAA, used all 4 years there, got in the pros, worked his way up, jumped around, and has finally found himself a full-time roster spot later than you would assume most players would find it. And I'm assuming you've got a little bit more insight than others into that whole situation and how great of a job he's done throughout his career at making himself valuable and improving and getting better, and being just a great model to other young players about not maybe having the McDavid genetics, but finding a way to become an unbelievable hockey player.
Well, remember that story I told you about, that fourth line player that signed a significant role? That's him. Earlier in the podcast here. So Garnett's like one of my best friends. I love the guy to death. I've trained him for a very long time, and he's one of those players that I trained and isolated like skating techniques with, like turn him into a good skater because he had this running stride. But this is again why when you start becoming better as a coach, you really understand the big picture. Garnet Hathaway became Garnet Hathaway the day he became line mates with Chris Kreider. So him and Chris Kreider are best friends. And Garnet Hathaway started to improve his skating as he played alongside Kreider. There's a reason for that. Okay. And the reason is that Phillips Andover, when they played together, Garnet needed to keep up. Garnet also. And so he just started to adapting things that Kreider did. And luckily for Garnet, he had a similar build. So he was able to implement a lot of things that Chris did. And so that wasn't until Garnet's junior year. And then his senior year, he was by himself when Chris left for BC. And then from there, Garnet's a very loyal person. So he was going to Brown University, and that's where he ended up going. When he went to Brown, he never lost what he learned at Andover. He enhanced it because he was the man. He became the guy, and he was put in every situation at that school, which allowed him to garner and build confidence within his game offensively. But also he understood that he still was an elite level skater. He had a tremendous power. And that's what he did to leverage his points and how he would have success at Brown. And Brown isn't known for a D1 juggernaut, but him and his two classmates, they got their team to get to the semifinals in the ECAC conference one year because of how good those three were. And they were able to win games to get there. And that's how he built his confidence within that level. Now, yes, him and I did certain things earlier on, but when I started to become more aware of actually what the game was when he was in Calgary, that's where I was able to actually coach him real objectives. Because before, it was all about him getting stronger, faster, quicker, and becoming more biomechanically sounder in a skating and shooting element and working his hands. And now it's all about actually how to play the game. He never really learned how to play the game because he would just physically dominate everybody. He'd try to do that over and over and over again. And because he has an elite motor and his perseverance is unbelievable, and he can will himself to anything he wants to do, that's how he got to where he was in Calgary at that moment. He'd fight people. Like, he had to do so many things that not many people would do to get to where he was. But then once he was in a position where he earned his first NHL game, and then he got the confidence from the organization, we then started to build out how to become better where he was a lot. And that's where he was able to get that deal, because he started to invest his time and energy on the right stuff to actually keep him there longer than just have a one-hit wonder. And that's what he does now. And he's very, very good at it, and he's very confident at it. And
there's some real elite talents there in Washington that are under the radar with Hathaway and Eller, I would say. And Nick Dowd's not a bad player either. So I'm excited that he's found a spot. It's a story that more people should pay attention to, especially people who really are interested in how development occurs and how it's not exactly linear, and how a guy who, as a senior, scores a point every other game can find a great role and an impactful role and create a lot for himself and others at the NHL level even. So exciting.
No,
and
exactly.
I love how you guys had kind of a similar path together as you learned and figured things out.
Well, we are very, like, I always say this to everybody, like, I am lucky. Like, my time in Maine, this is luck. This is not me, like, being elite at what I did earlier on. My time in Maine was phenomenal. Like, I had Oliver Wahlstrom, Brian Dumoulin, and Garnet Hathaway all at the same time. Like, that's unheard of. Like, those three guys are really where I am today, where I am. Like, obviously I have perseverance too, and I didn't play. I played little D3, but those guys really kindled my ability to get to the next level because I loved working with them so much. I needed to make sure I every day got better to keep them with me, because I could provide them the best opportunity, right? And that's I got lucky at that time, because you probably won't see that again in Maine, where three players of that ability are hanging around to drive and push coaches to the next level.
That's awesome. Well, Adam, we've taken up a lot of time for our listeners here. 2 minutes, anything you want to talk about, shout out to, etc. It's all yours, and then we'll wrap up here. But I really appreciate all the time you spent and all the knowledge you've dropped on us.
No problem. I just think for many coaches out there, is you got to drive passion with the players. Like you got to build the passion, because the more that they love the game, the more that they're going to improve, because they're going to be hungry to really push themselves to play long. And the more they want to play longer, they need to keep building on their skill sets and their cognitive. That's what I leave a lot of people. Just build the passion, man. Like that's it. It's all you have to do. And then as coaches, you've got to push yourself to get better too. You have to push yourself to improve all the time and ask the right questions, and not just lean on things because it's easy. So those are things that I think are really important to becoming an elite level coach and player. You've got to create the passion on both sides. And if you can create that passion, anything is really going to be possible. And you can see it with a lot of people that I talk to now, that the reason where I am today is because of that passion. And I love it. Like I literally 24/7, I don't think about hockey. I think about helping people reach their full potential. That's what I think about. And obviously the vehicle that I use is hockey to do that. But I'm not just sitting there thinking about hockey and how can I be the best coach at teaching hockey. That's not what I strive to be. I strive to be the best teacher of humans, right? And being able to build the passion so that we can all grow together. That's what I think is the real secret sauce behind it all.
Man, you're making me passionate about here, and I'm already passionate enough. I might have a problem here shortly.
Well, that's it. It's fun, right? It's fun when you enjoy it and you really believe that you can make a difference and you can help other people enjoy it and build that passion. Also, it's infectious.
Awesome stuff here, Adam. Thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. Have fun. I know you're doing a nice work trip right now, so enjoy your time there. And thanks again for coming on.
All right, Greg, no problem. Take care. Chat soon.
That concludes this week's episode. Thanks for joining us here at Hockey IQ. If you haven't already, take a quick moment to hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and drop a review. If you want to be a great teammate, even recommend us to a friend. You can follow us at Hockey's Arsenal on Twitter and Instagram. Check out the website, hockeysarsenal.com, where you can subscribe to the weekly newsletter. You won't regret it. Catch your buttes here next week for a brand new episode.